Oh, and Eileen, I'm reading your question. Right now, Brenda is sharing her screen, so her video is not on.
To do it and not Zoom.
The Q&A.
Oh, no, the video. See, like,
And while the chat feature is activated, I would recommend using the QA window instead to ask questions, because that's primarily what Brenda will be looking for in terms of questions from the attendees.
Do you want to open?
Yes, so you can vote on the question by clicking on the thumbs up, and that will give it an upvote. Yes, everyone is on mute by default except for the panelists.
All right, Michael, I think we can start if everybody thinks we're ready.
Okay, we've got 120 on currently, and it is recording.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. I know that we can't hear you, so hopefully you can hear us. I am here today. I'm Brenda L'Italian with LHS Associates, and we are joined by Jeff Silvestro, the CEO and President of LHS. This is a rare occasion that he'll sit still this time of year, so we're appreciative that he's here. We're actually going to cover two different topics today. I think the first one being processing early ballot options. This is basically coming out of the Zoom meeting you had with the state last week, just kind of reviewing those options so you can pick and see what best suits you and your town. At the end of that section, we will take time for some questions. We do have some pre-submitted questions, so we will answer those as well. And then we will move over to the early voting using the poll pad section. And again, we will take time for questions at the end of that as well. So this is the big question, processing early ballots on election day. So this first portion would be at the polls. Early voting and election day ballots are processed through the same tabulator and same memory card on election day. So that is considered processing those early ballots at the polls. Processing early ballots prior to election day, which we will now consider early voting central tab facility, is early vote ballots being processed through a separate early vote precinct memory card prior to election day. And then the third option is processing early ballots on election day. So that would be considered an election day central tab facility. And that would be early ballots being processed through a separate EV precinct memory card and a separate tabulator on election day. The state has also indicated that you may open envelopes and flatten the ballots and sort the ballots prior to election day. That is an option, but where they haven't released any regulations or guidelines for that, as far as checking those in, we're going to kind of just default that those instructions to the state at the state level. So just to talk a little bit more in detail, processing early ballots on election day. You have one set of memory cards. All your ballots go out to the polls. All the ballots go through the same tabulators per precinct, same memory cards. Processing early ballots prior to election day, that's where you will designate central tab facility. You will not cast any ballots from the previous day. You will notify observers, and you will actually open the envelopes and process the ballots through the tabulator. You will not be checking in early voters in person and having them cast the ballot through the tabulator. Processing early vote ballots on election day. The election day central tab facility is very much the same as the early vote. You will just need to designate that central tab location for election day and notify the state. Jeff, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's pretty much what it is. I mean, your options, processing at the polls is going to be exactly the same as it's always been. Reminder that any absentee ballots that come in on election day, any mail-in ballots that come in on election day have to go out to the polling place if you have not declared a central tabulation facility. You do not have to have a central tabulation facility on election day if you process ballots early. I know that's something that some people are confused by, but just to clarify that, to the best of our knowledge, if you process ballots early at a tabulation facility prior to election day, you do not have to have a central tabulation facility set up on election day itself. You can send ballots out to the polls to be processed on election day.
Perfect. So how do we do this? Some of you may have already received this with your memory card. Some of you may have been emailed these instructions, but this is basically the set of instructions that we would provide to you with your memory cards as to how to operate a central tab facility. So this would be whether it's an early vote central tab or one that's conducted on election day.
So the biggest thing to remember is because the state does not print ballots with precinct-specific codes, but you do have to report by precinct, that each precinct set of ballots is going to have to go through its own set of memory cards. So if you are trying to use one single tabulator to process all of your ballots in early voting processing, you need to use a separate card or set of cards for each precinct. So as you see in these instructions, you'll insert your first precinct set of cards into the tabulator, power it on, go through the process of opening the polls. Very important to make sure that your count on the first day is at 0. Process just that precinct's ballots through that set of precinct memory cards. When all the ballots have been processed and recorded for that day, we want to make sure that we write down the number of ballots that was processed that day. You'll see that on the public counter on the machine. Shut that machine off, remove those memory cards, and then go and start the process all over again with your precinct 2 memory cards. So the two biggest things there on the first day are to make sure that you have verified that the machine is starting at 0 and that you have recorded the number of votes processed that day before shutting the machine off. Be sure to empty the ballot box. You don't want to mix up precinct ballots. So really, when you're done with that precinct, get everything out. You have write-ins, you're going to have your regular ballots. Keep those separated and keep them within that one precinct. You do not want to commingle those ballots. It's going to be very difficult to unsort everything if that gets mixed up. So once you've done all that, we now fast forward to election night. We cannot close any of the tabulators and print any results until 8 o'clock on election night. So we want to get a tabulator, get those early vote processing memory cards, turn them on, go through the procedure of closing the polls, print out your tapes, and now those tapes are going to have to get added to the tapes that come off of your polling place election day tabulators to get a full precinct total for that precinct. Can you pull up that question thing just to see if anybody's... Yep.
Is there a lot of vote by questions? This is a good one here.
Yep. So again, any of those vote by mail ballots that show up on 9/1 have to go out to the polling places. If you have declared a central tabulation facility, then yes, those ballots can go through the central tabulator, into a tabulator at the central tabulation facility. So yeah, again, Don, if you do have a early vote central tabulation facility and a central tabulation facility on election day, you do not have to have both. You can have one or the other, or you can have both. Or if you want to process everything at the polls on election day, you don't have to have either. They've really made it very flexible for you guys to decide how you want to process these ballots.
I think that's wrong. You good?
Yep.
Okay. Did we touch upon these on the bottom?
Okay, the can and cannots, I guess. You cannot use the same memory cards for your central tabulation facility and your election day memory cards. You need two separate sets of cards for this. So regardless if you're using those cards to process ballots early before the election, using them to process at a central tabulation facility, and using cards at your actual polling places for those tabulators, they all have to be separate cards. You can't use the same cards for any of those things. So if we send you memory cards and you do not receive enough of them, you need to call us so that we can make those up. If you let us know ahead of time, we can get that all made up and get that out to you all in one shipment, so you get everything at the same time. As Brenda said, this is really this is the exact set of instructions you're going to be receiving with your memory cards. So obviously, if you have any questions, please call us and we can walk you through the process.
Just on that note, some memory cards were sent out without these instructions. Some memory cards, you were sent an extra set of cards because you have typically done early vote tabulation, a central facility. So that was done in advance. This is being recorded. You guys will have access to this. If you didn't receive the instructions, these are exactly what was sent, if not a little bit more on the detailed side. So if you do not have an extra set of memory cards and you are looking to do an early vote central tab facility or an election day central tab facility, please reach out, get in touch with Kristen at LHS. She will get you out an extra set of cards. And that is even if you have already received your election day cards, we can still do that for you. Casey, I just want to answer your question really quick. If vote by mail ballots show up on 9/1, I thought they were all supposed to go out to the polls. That is correct unless you have declared a central tab facility on election day. That is considered a polling location. So then those ballots from that day would go to the election day central facility. Okay. Move on to our next screen. And this is our question screen. We will go up to the Q&A, just see if there's any more questions up there. I know you guys are putting some questions in the chat. It's helpful if you throw them up in the Q&A for us. We are trying to review and answer every single one. We'll start at the bottom here.
All right, Chris, I'm seeing your question about manually adding totals from a CTF. If you do have the report tally and results software for the ImageCast product, then you will be able to do that electronically, and it will add the two and create a report for precinct totals through that software. If you do not have that, or if you're on the AccuVote, if you do not have GEMS, the only way to do it is to manually add the two tapes together to get a precinct count, a full precinct count. Karen, CTF with the polls same day election.
Terry, just to answer your question, if you just reach out to Kristen, she will send you an extra set of cards. It's no problem if you answered one way and you're changing your mind.
If anybody has memory card questions, please call John Hurley and he can get that squared away. If you have programming questions, calling Kristen is going to be the best and quickest way to resolve those things. We'll try to address as many of those topics here, but if you feel you have a specific question, then please don't hesitate to call.
Elizabeth, to answer your question, can you use the same room for central tabulation location as actual early voting? I would actually say no to that. You can certainly check at the state level, but where you're not supposed to be processing ballots that were being voted on the same day, I'm not sure that that would be the best idea. Maybe another room off it would probably be the best answer, but I would check with the state for sure on that.
The anonymous question about number of machines, if you do have multiple machines, then absolutely you can use a separate machine for each precinct. Not everyone out there, you know, if you have 20 precincts, you may not have 20 spare machines, but if you have 4 machines, then you can absolutely use all 4. Just the biggest thing to keep in mind is that every precinct ballot has to go through that specific set of precinct memory cards. And you want to make sure all those ballots are separated by precinct. You do not want to commingle any of those ballots. Barbara, I believe anytime after they are received, you can process them. What we are suggesting to people, though, is if you are going to process ballots early before Election Day, to wait until you have a certain amount of ballots for each precinct. If you only get maybe 20 or 50 ballots that day, it might not be the best use of your time to go through the process of getting your machines, put together, getting the people to check those ballots in, getting them processed and shutting the machines down. It may be better to wait until you get 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 ballots. That's going to be up to each individual town's staffing abilities and space requirements. But I would try and figure out a certain number before you start putting ballots through tabulators, just to make the best use of everyone's time.
That's going to be a pull pen thing process for checking them in.
Carlene, as far as GEMS and RTR software, that's the accumulation software that's used for larger communities that have multiple precincts that allow them to upload their memory cards into that software, and then the software will actually accumulate all of the precinct data and generate reports to give you citywide or townwide totals. In this instance, if you have that software, you'll be able to combine your early vote central tabulation and precinct-based tabulators to get precinct totals from all of those different types of voting methods, I guess.
Ellen, you can actually, your question is, I have 3 precincts, 1 spare to process ballots before Election Day. Do I use my precinct tabulators for each precinct, or do I use my spare machine to process?
So the problem with that, and you're going to have to get clarification from the state, is once you test your precinct memory cards, your pre-election testing, those cards are supposed to stay locked in the machines themselves. So if you have tested those cards in those machines, then really the spare machine would be the only one that you have access to process those ballots early. I don't know if they're going to lift that and kind of ease those restrictions and make it easier for you to use all of your precinct machines prior to Election Day, and then have those cards and those machines available to use on Election Day. That's something we're going to have to get some guidance from Michelle on, I think.
Some of these questions about how to process for check-in, we're going to get to that on the poll pad portion. So we're not ignoring your questions. We just think we could probably answer them in the next section. Oh, Karen, that's a good one.
Sorry, Brenda, you can absentee ballots also come to the CT.
Yes.
I don't even understand that.
So Karen, you're asking, can absentee ballots go to the central tab facility if using Election Day central tab? AV and EV ballots received back or in person can go through a central tab facility.
There's a question about processing ballots early in a town hall that's close to the public. You're gonna have to talk to the state about that one. To the best of my knowledge, I believe that process has to be available to the public. It was discussed in the Zoom meeting with Michelle last week. Even if the public's not allowed in the same room as the processing, if there's a glass window, I believe she said, as long as it's in view, this can happen. But I wouldn't want to answer that. I would want them to give you guidance on that. Lisa, you're asking about using a second machine for EVs. I don't know what you mean by registering this machine. If we gave you a second set of memory cards to use for EVs, that's what you would need. Again, you need separate memory cards for Election Day and early vote tabulation. You cannot use the same cards for both. KC, that's right. You do have to take those cards out and put them back in if you're using a single machine. If you have multiple machines, again, if you have 4 precincts and 4 spare machines, then those cards can just stay in those machines and stay in them ready to process all of that precinct's ballots during early voting.
Lillian, your question is all absentee ballots can be processed at CTF on Election Day. Absentee ballots and early vote ballots, are processing them at the central tab facility is no different than going down and processing them at the polls. You have just designated a location where you will be processing. So yes, you can process absentee ballots and early vote ballots at your central tab facility. You want to do Ellen?
Yeah, Ellen, I believe anytime you're using a central tabulation facility, you have to declare that with the state. So if it's an early voting central tabulation facility, they would need to be made aware of it ahead of time. And an Election Day central tabulation facility, they would also need to be made aware of that ahead of time. Essentially what you're doing is declaring a polling place to run those ballots. So because of that, you do have to declare or notify that that's happening. Trudy, we do not provide you with a form for keeping track of the number of ballots processed through the tabulator each day for early voting. That's kind of a, I don't know, a spreadsheet or something you could probably keep together. If you are using the poll pads, we can keep track of the number of people checked in and you can match that against your count. But as far as at the tabulator level, that's something you need to keep track of on your own. You may actually want to ask the state if they have a form or something that needs to be filled out for each day of processing. I think that would be a good idea on their part to provide you with that, just to make it an official document, I guess. Deb, we are going to get to the poll pads after this section.
Did we?
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. The Q&A is kind of jumping around, so I'm just going through the list to make sure we've answered everything. If you see anything that you think hasn't been answered, please hit the thumbs up, and that will move it up the list to the top so we can see it much easier. Carlene, you asked about renting spare machines for November. We just went through an extensive leasing process with the state. Anyone who was able to lease through that program should have already received their machines or will be receiving them in the next 2 weeks. At this point, we do not have any further inventory. We are going to try and get some additional inventory. So if you would like additional machines for November, please contact us immediately. Anyone who has received a leased machine through this lease program will have the option to buy it out after November. We're going to be sending out some information regarding that with pricing towards the middle to end of September into October. So that will be something for you to expect as well. But please, if you're looking for additional machines for November, we need to know ASAP. I can't promise anything at this point, but if I have a list, I can at least start trying to find out if it's possible to get additional equipment. Amy, I think we covered this. I'm going to read your question. Can we use one set of cards for early voting and on election day? That is not possible. If you have early voting, you're processing early voting on the days before the election, you need a separate set of cards from your election day cards. You cannot run ballots through the same set of cards. That need to be kept separate. Karen, you're asking about staffing requirements. We really can't answer that. That's really up to each individual community regarding how much staff they need to operate that. I know some places there's going to be restrictions on social distancing, so you need to make sure that you have a room big enough to allow people to be spread out while doing this process. So it's really going to be hard for us to comment on anything specifically. You're going to have to follow local guidelines. You're going to have to look at what space you have available and how much staff you have available. I think doing this for September is going to be a good gauge of what everyone's going to need for November. So we are lucky in the fact that we have the ability to run this September election in this way, which will allow us to kind of figure out the best practices and learn some lessons now so that we can, improve going into November. Okay, I think that's just about everything on the machine side. Oh, yes, Lisa, you do have to notify the state if it's going to be a central tabulation facility. Thank you, everyone, for being patient while we're just scrolling through the list of questions here. Casey's asking a recommended amount of time for each tabulator. That's a tough question to answer, again, just based on staff and space, I guess. For an ImageCast tabulator, it generally takes about 60 to 90 seconds to boot up, 60 seconds to power down, and somewhere in the ballpark of, I'd say, 7 to 10 seconds to process a ballot. Those times can be cut down, but that's kind of the average time that we would use for a process like this, just to make sure that everyone's being careful, that ballots don't get commingled, that the process is actually being handled correctly. You really don't want to speed through this and get anything mixed up. It's really better to take your time and make sure it's done properly. It's going to be hard for us to give you a timing on that, a recommendation for that. All right, I think that's it for this section. If we missed anything, please get in touch with me directly. Obviously, we're always here to help you out and answer any questions you have. Before we go on to the next section and address poll pads specifically, I did want to make one announcement that I think will answer some of the questions in here. For the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've been putting together an extensive video program to try and address training needs and requirements. We understand it's not only difficult for our people to get out and do training in person, but it's also difficult for you all to have poll workers and staff come into large rooms and not follow social distancing guidelines. So we've been in the process of trying to build a video library of training videos for various types of equipment and various scenarios. Starting Monday, we're going to go live on our website. We'll have a virtual training portal that you can go in and you can get a subscription. There'll be 3 levels of subscriptions, a 20, a 30, and a 45-day subscription. You'll sign up for that and you'll have access to all the videos available. In the beginning, there will only be poll pad and ImageCast videos available, but we are hoping to add and expand on that in the coming months before November. We want to get some troubleshooting videos on there for different various things that may happen. We want to get some AccuVote videos on there for our legacy customers. But that's really where we're headed on this. And hopefully by Monday, that will all be live and up and running. You'll be able to, again, purchase a subscription, use those login credentials to allow your poll workers to go on and watch the videos for training. You'll be able to conduct virtual trainings through Zoom. Any of those types of things is really what we want you to be doing. We don't want to lose the ability to train the poll workers and train you, our customers, like we have in the past, but just being sensitive to social distancing and obviously the current conditions that we're in. We're trying to move a lot of that to the virtual side, and hopefully that works out. Again, that's something I'd ask, for patience, and obviously recommendations from people. If you have suggestions on the best way to do some of that or changes that you think need to be made. Again, in the beginning of this, it will be very limited. It's going to be very generalized. There won't be a lot of specific things. We're trying to tailor, one suit fits all, which I know is very difficult. But we will be expanding on it in the coming months and growing that library of videos. So I will hand this over to Brenda now, and she can get into the poll pads.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. All right, the big questions. Poll pad use for early voting. I do want to mention really quick, if we are looking to purchase additional equipment for October early voting and November, the deadline to purchase equipment is September 20th. I know that seems really close by, but it's taking approximately 5 to 6 weeks to get inventory in. It is limited. So if that is something that you're thinking about and you don't have a quote, please let me know. I will get you one. If you do have a quote and you have any questions, please just reach out. Let's get the equipment that people need. If anyone is looking to lease additional equipment for October and November, our inventory is depleted at the moment. We don't know if we will be getting any inventory in for October and November. That being said, keep in mind that lease equipment through the state program is for early voting period specifically. The state is not offering equipment for election day check-in. And that is just basically because of volume. If it's one poll pad per precinct, that would be a lot of lease equipment that we would have to house here. So lease equipment is strictly for the early voting process. And just keep that in mind. Whoops. Okay. So processing in-person early voters, okay? This is a two-part process. For those of you who have used poll pads before for early voting, this is gonna be just a little bit different. And this is gonna fall into someone walks in and checks in person today. That ballot is not going to be processed until the next day through a tabulator. So keep that in mind as we go forward. So step one of the two-part process is checking in the in-person voter. So your poll pads will be in an in-person early voting configuration. And what that means is that configuration is telling that poll pad how we want it to operate. So we're saying these are the functions that we want on the poll pad during early voting. So we will assign it to that configuration. So the voter comes into early vote, and if you look at the first image to the left, it says in-person early voting. The poll worker will search for the voter. The voter comes up. The poll worker will select voted early ballot. The label or ticket will print. You will hand them the envelope, the ticket or label, and the ballot, and the voter will be on their way. You will, once you go to select that voted early ballot, you will be given this prompt over here on the right. Are you sure you wish to proceed? So what is happening as they're checking in this person is we are now changing that absentee status from no to voted early. And the important part of that is now at the end of the day, when we scan that check-in into the VRIS system, we are now notifying it of the change. So when the supplemental file comes back in the morning, that voter will be flagged as voted early. So the step two part of that process is actually casting that ballot. So day 2 comes along, you've now imported your supplemental. This person is now reflective as voted early over here on the left-hand side tile. You've opened their envelope, you've removed the ballot from the envelope. You'll now select the voter and you will actually cast the early ballot. And what that does is it's now sending a flag back up to VRIS when you scan it or upload it, that that voter has now cast their early ballot. If you are doing an early vote central tab facility or an election day, or you can even use this feature at the polls, if you go to summary report, you'll be able to get a list of all of your check-ins that you have just used the poll pad for. You can go over to the absentee portion and the summary report. You can get a breakdown by precinct. That's a great way to verify that the number of ballots that you have put through that precinct, you have also used the poll pad to check in. This slide is basically just giving you guys an overview of the early voting in person, the tasks that you will need to do every day. I know there's a lot of concern about Extract 23 and the voter registration deadline of August 22nd, which is the same day early voting starts. So basically these daily tasks are going to allow us to pull in supplemental files that can kind of catch up with all of those status changes in voter registration. So basically the first day of early voting happens, you're going to go ahead and check in your early voters, and either throughout the day you're going to scan those check-ins from a PDF or scan directly from the early vote envelopes, and you're going to scan those into the EV module of the VRIS computer. Once you have completed that daily task, you're going to request a new extract, and that's extract number 23. The following morning, that extract should be waiting for you, and you're going to import that extract into ePulse. And yes, we have instructions already for you of how to do that, and we will send that out with the calendars of the day-to-day tasks for each one of you PollPad users. That supplemental file is going to bring in all those status changes. So if you had some requests for an early ballot or an absentee ballot, or you had people come in and vote in person, all of those statuses come in from that supplemental file, update ePulse, and then ePulse updates those poll pads. As you continue through the check-in process, you're going to basically do the same thing as you did the first day. You're going to check in your in-person early voters. For early voting, you're going to process the ballots through the tabulator from the previous day. And this, again, is only if you're doing an early vote central tab facility. Before we get to a few reminders, we'll review some of the questions here. Let's see. Maybe can we still do the old-fashioned way? Check voters in on each day, upload that history into VRS, and do nothing more until election day. Okay. So Trudy, your question is, for early voting, can we still do the old-fashioned way? Correct. Check voters in on each day, upload that history into VRIS, and do nothing more until election day, where the ballots will be opened and put through the tabulator. That is correct if you are not doing a central tab facility. That would be if you are processing your ballots at the polls. And even if that is the case and you're using the poll pads at the polls, you will still need to go through and cast those voting early. Casey, can we have one poll pad at the early voting site to check in person, and then an additional poll pad at our early vote central tab to do the cast? Okay, so you can have poll pads in different configurations. So let's just say that it's day 2 of early voting. You can have one poll pad in the early voting cast central tab facility and still be using a poll pad to check people in person. That is something that we will get that information from you, which poll pads you will be assigning to check in early voting in person, and which poll pad you'll be using to actually process or cast those ballots through the tabulator. The configuration will allow you to do different things. So we will, the answer to that, the short answer is yes. You've now imported on day 2 supplemental. Can you expand on that? So one of the problems with the deadline to register for the September election being the same day as early voting starts, we are asking you to give us your extracts to create your elections well in advance of August 22nd, at least 48 hours in advance. I know that seems pretty far outside the window, but there's over 150 of you to create election files for. We want to have the calendar set. We will be able to create all of your elections, and then simply by pulling in a supplemental file, what that does is any changes that you have made to the VRIS system will now be imported into the poll pad and update those changes. The only thing a supplemental file does not do is if you have any voters that were removed. The supplemental file does not tell the poll pad that these certain people were deleted. So you do want to keep track of that. But the supplemental file will bring in any type of status change, such as absentee sent to absentee received, early vote ballot requested to voted early. Keep in mind that your VRIS system is where all the information needs to be added. You need to scan into your AV and your EV module daily to get that information updated. That's why you're requesting a new extract. ePulse is just basically a hub for that updated information. So that supplemental is coming from that VR system, coming into ePulse. And then ePulse is telling the poll pad what is different today from yesterday. And all of those differences and changes are based on what you have scanned into the VRIS module the previous day. Anonymous, I hope that answered your question. Let's see. I'm confused, Barbara, I'm confused about casting on the poll pad. If we scan to the VRIS, we still have to do a cast on the poll pad. Yes, absolutely. The reason is because on election day, you want to be able to export that voter history for those voted early ballots with your regular election day voter history. If you do not do the vote cast on the poll pad, then your voter history will be missing the voted early voters. Will we be able to use, this is from Mary, the poll pads both for early voting check-in and check-in at the polls? The answer is yes, you will be able to use them for both. We are still waiting on the certification process. So if you do use them at the polls, the regulations for that has not been released, but as soon as we have that information, we will share that with you. Okay, Richard. Last week, Michelle Tassinari indicated that only one poll pad would be allowed to be used at the check-in table because of security concerns around poll pads' ability to communicate wirelessly with one another. That is correct. How practical is that going to be to only have one person able to check in people? Well, that depends on how many people early vote and how many people come out to the polls. Are you going to be able to present information to her that shows the security of that wireless connection and convince her to allow multiple pads? So I just want to be clear about connectivity at the polls. The security concern around Wi-Fi is an absolute justifiable one. Information that we have been sharing is to basically let people know that you do not need Wi-Fi on election day to have poll pads within the same precinct talk to each other. Those of you that have used poll pads in the past are well aware of what we call peer-to-peer technology. That allows the poll pads to talk to each other through a non-network and their Bluetooth antenna, and be able to share the check-ins that each one is doing without Wi-Fi. So we are sharing that information. The one thing I do want to encourage everyone to kind of be on board with is, you know, like everything else, this is baby steps. So maybe for September, this is, you know, one poll pad at check-in. Maybe they'll let us use one poll pad for just checking in the EV and AV ballots and keep those separate. But, you know, one step at a time. Being able to use these on election day for September will be great. If we do a wonderful job, maybe there'll be considerations for things further for November. So I think that's important that we understand that they're proceeding cautiously. So Richard, I hope that answered your question. Let's see. So only one pad at the multiple precincts at one location. Trudy, no. If you have one poll pad, it's one poll pad per precinct. So such as yourself, you have multiple precincts in one location. Each poll pad would be designated for one of those precincts. Give me just 1 second. We'll go through some of these questions. Janice, she was not on the call at the beginning. Does she need to have the poll pads programmed? So poll pads do not have memory cards like your tabulators. Poll pads rely on extracts that come from your VRIS system. I do think, Janice, you have dropped us extracts in the past. So it would be basically the same thing. You would request extract 23. Those of you who have not done a street file recently, we're asking you to request extract 4 this time, just so we can get all that up to date. And then that's what we will use to create the election for you. For the election creation portion, I just want to touch on that a little bit. We are asking you guys to provide us the information early, and we do understand that. That's kind of like a twofold situation. Number one, we want to be prepared before August 22nd. But number two, we want to basically get these elections set up for you in advance so that when early voting begins on the 22nd, the poll pad team is there and ready to support you. Elections have been created, and now we can support you with your questions throughout the day. Maybe you're having trouble importing your supplemental file the first time. So that's basically reason number 2 for doing that. A supplemental file is going to fill in any gaps between the date that you gave it to us and any work that you did in between there. Casey, how does the vote cast information go from the poll pad into VRIS? So throughout early voting, you are scanning the statuses into the EV and AV module. On election day or through the early voting central tab facility, if you're using one, you cast that voter's ballot. That cast is now sending a flag. Once you get that information back into ePulse, that cast button is actually sending a flag now that's saying voted. So I think in your VR system, it's a V, which makes perfect sense. So when you now are done with your poll pads, you sync everything through ePulse, whether it's live syncing or manual syncing, you'll export your voter history. When you export your voter history as a TXT file, that will get uploaded into the VRIS computer. You'll take it from ePulse, you'll put it on a USB or a flash drive, walk it over to your state computer, enter into your activity file, and upload the voter history into that specific election.
Is that right?
Can we have one person have early vote sent? Yes. What about the by mail ballots? Barbara will only have to cast the in-person EVs on the poll pad. No, Barbara, you will have the ability to actually do the EV and AVs on the poll pad. I think if we go back to that cast screen, you'll see that during your central tab facility, right here, over to the right, if you guys can still see the screen, you have the ability to do an early ballot cast or an absentee ballot cast. So both can be cast and uploaded on the poll pad. I missed the last answer, no matter CTF or old way, we need to cast the ballot correct on the poll pads. I'm not sure what the other question was.
That Valerie.
If I have Valerie, while you're there, thank you for putting this together. I'm sure it's much appreciated. If I have two precincts, will the poll pad be used in precinct 1 only? Have precinct 1 voters and vice versa for precinct 2? That's a great question. Your poll pads on election day will be precinct specific, but they will still include all of your voters town or city wide. So if you have poll pad 1 assigned to precinct 1, only the voters in precinct 1 will be allowed to be checked in on that poll pad. If someone from another precinct comes and tries to check in on that poll pad, the poll worker will be able to instruct them, yes, I see you. Yes, you're a registered voter. You're in the wrong precinct. You need to be in precinct 2, and then be able to advise them as to where that location is. Good question. If you're doing a central tab facility, those central tab facilities, along with check-in or cast, those poll pads will be put in vote centers, which means you will have the ability to check in all voters for all precincts on the one poll pad, and then be able to go into summary report and actually get a breakdown of each precinct specifically. Annie, why do we have to request a new extract at the end of each day? Well, you technically don't have to, but if you're using your poll pads to check in voters in person, you're going to want to have the most current file on that poll pad. So if someone requested an early ballot on Monday and you're not pulling in supplemental files, and they come in to request to vote in person on Wednesday, that poll pad isn't going to reflect the fact that that person has requested an early ballot. So I know it might seem overwhelming. I think once you do it for the first day or two, you'll realize it is a very easy process, and I think it's actually going to help keep the poll pad and your VRIS system in sync. And that's really what we want to do. We want that poll pad to be reflective of what you're actually putting into the EV and AV module.
start just dismissing anything you answer verbally or write down a
Okay.
response if you're not.
Okay. Wouldn't you know if the in-person voted because their name had been checked off? Janice, your question is, wouldn't you know if the person voted because their name would have been checked off? I'm not sure. Maybe ask me that a different way. I might be able to answer that. Diane, if we process EV and AV ballots through the poll pad and upload to the CVR, will Election Day check-in voter list have an X in the check-off box to indicate voter has cast an early absentee ballot? Yes, I'm not sure if it's an X or an EV. Maybe another clerk can answer that. But as long as you are updating the module in your VR system, yes, your printed paper voting list will reflect the status that the voter has. Let's see. Barbara, so for an early vote central tab, we'd set up our machines and run the ballots through while at the same time checking the envelopes and casting the ballots through the poll pad. So if I have 3 extra scanners and 3 poll pads, we'd be able to do 3 precincts at the same time. Yes, you definitely could do 3 at the same time, and you could separate them by precinct if you wanted to, but you really would only need 1 poll pad to do that because it would be in a vote center. You could actually check in all 3 precincts on 1 poll pad. We're gonna just kind of answer a couple other questions, and then if you guys, if I didn't get to your question, please just email me or call me and we'll get your answer, your question answered. Joanne, I love your question. So sorry, but this is overwhelming. I agree. I'm sure there's many people who agree with you. Will we be provided with a step-by-step daily instruction sheet? When and how? You absolutely will be. Anybody who's done early voting in the past knows that we send you a calendar. This is what you do leading up to it. This is what you do day 1. We walk you all the way through to the last day of early voting, and then what you need to do to prepare for election day. We are waiting a little bit on releasing that calendar, just kind of seeing what happens a little bit with poll pads and the process. The last thing I want to do is give you guys guidelines and a process that doesn't fit with any type of regulations. So we still have a little time, but yes, you will absolutely receive a calendar. Just going to go through a couple of quick questions here, see if there's something that we haven't really touched upon. Can we split an extract between poll pads, similar to what we do with paper? The answer to that is no. The poll pad will have the entire town, if it's a vote center, or the specific precinct on it. If you put up a sign that said A through L on one poll pad and M through Z on another, that would solve that. But if you're trying to get around the 1 poll pad per precinct, if that's what comes to be, that would not be able to happen. Did you say for us to request extract 4 to set up the election? Deb, extract 4 is your street file. 23 is what we need to set up your election. If you have not given us a street file in a while, we're just asking you while you're in there, request 4 so we can make sure that your street file is up to date. When I request 23, does it go directly to poll pads? No, it does not. There is always an air gap between your VRIS system and your poll pad and ePost. That is the way you want it. That is the safest way for it to be. All poll pads need to be imported on once the election is created. If we let you know that your election has been created and it is time to import, You don't just import on one pad. You import on one pad, you verify everything, and then you need to go down the line and import that voter file on each and every poll pad you will be deploying. Let me just see if there's, do you lease poll pads? Will elections pay for the lease? We do lease poll pads, Ellen, for early voting through a state lease program. We do not have any inventory left. We do not lease poll pads for election day use. And if you're interested, if we possibly got more inventory for November, you certainly can email me and I will put you on a wait list. Again, if you're looking towards election day, those poll pads will need to be purchased, not through a lease program. Can we have speed dial number and email address for you and your staff? I think most of you actually do, by the way. Yes, actually what's going to happen when we, I'm actually going to go right to my reminders screen here so you guys can take a peek at this. So a couple reminders and then we'll just, any questions we can kind of, take off Zoom and you guys can, that we haven't answered, and just email. First and foremost, please don't wait. Check your supply inventory. Let us know if you need paper rolls or label rolls. Start charging your equipment now. Some of you need an iOS update. We want everybody on 13 or higher. If you're going to be charging your equipment, it automatically turns on when you charge it. Shoot us an email, let us know you're doing it, and we will update the iOS for you remotely. So let us know. But remember that paper printers only take paper and label printers only take labels. Paper receipt rolls get you about 800 tickets, label rolls about 500 labels. So use that as a guide when you're ordering. And those are up on the website, so you guys can order that. Check for your cables and your charging blocks. Make sure you have everything you need. This is a big one. I think we had some issues, with battery bases. I say issues because yes, they can be issues. But please start to think about electrical outlets for both early voting and election day. You will need your printers. Printers have to be plugged in. If you're plugging in a printer, you probably have an outlet there or a power strip of some sort. Save yourself some time and aggravation and keep the poll pad and the printer plugged in. That will give you less to do. You will not have to charge battery bases every night. You will not have to charge poll pads. And I think it's going to be a lot easier for you at the end of the day, pack things up and just worry about processing early vote ballots as opposed to I have to charge 9 poll pads before tomorrow. If you already haven't, please return your poll pad questionnaire. If you feel like you didn't receive one, reach out to me, I will send you one. This poll pad questionnaire is actually how we're going to build our calendar. Based on the dates that you give us, that you feel like I can request my extract on the 17th, we will put you on the calendar for being ready to import for the 19th. We're gonna ask you to have a 48-hour wait period in between, so we have time to build your election, test your election, and make sure everything is in order before you import. Obviously, you'll still need to do the acceptance yourself once you import, but what will happen is you will have an assigned poll pad team member. So they will actually reach out to you, let you know that this is the individual who is working on your file if you have any questions or concerns. And then once you import again, you have their contact information and you can contact them directly. I hope that helps. Karen, I am going to suggest that you give me a phone call this afternoon and we definitely can get you some more information and make sure that you are comfortable going into this September election for sure. To Poll pads have to be charged or just plugged in. When a poll pad is plugged in, it is charging. So it's doing two things at once. The questionnaire was sent by email, so if you didn't receive it, Deb, I will definitely send you one. Okay, I know it is overwhelming. I know you guys probably have even, more questions that you'll think of beyond there. Jeff has opened it up for you guys to reach out to him directly. If it is poll pad related, I certainly will take the time and answer any questions you guys have after the Zoom meeting. Anything to?
Nope, that sounds perfect. As always, we're here. Just email us, give us a call. Anytime between now, the start of early voting on election day. I mean, all we can do is be here to try and help and support you guys the best we can. And, if we're all patient and calm and take a lot of deep breaths, I think we can get through this very successfully. But we have to do it together. So we look forward to hearing from you all and working with all of you, and good luck.
It was nice to answer all of your questions, you guys. I'm sorry I didn't get to see all your beautiful faces and handsome faces for some of you. But again, reach back out and have a great day.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.
Okay, so it'll take a little while for the recording to compile. Once it's done, I will share a link with you as to where it can be accessed.
Okay, perfect.
And I think the chat log is a separate video. It's definitely a separate text file. I don't know if it's going to appear in the video,
Okay.
but I will share that as well.
Okay, and the chat part, will the Q&A be part of that as well?
I think that's going to be in the video. Unfortunately, I
Okay.
won't know until I look at it. This is the first time I've done the webinar with the Q&A, so.
Yeah, I think it worked really well.
Yeah, I'm sorry you couldn't see everybody, but it seemed to be a little better than last week where we had some open mics and, people talking over each other on occasion.
Yeah, I agree.
But if we do this again, let me know what format you prefer.
Yeah, no, this worked great. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Michael.
Bye.
Bye-bye.